episode 94. Andrew and Matthew chew some fat. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, Andrew and I give a brief update on what's going on in our lives outside of Still Unbelievable, and then give our thoughts on my appearance on the Unbelievable podcast and some shows with Christians that we have recorded. As always, please see the show notes for items that are discussed. Enjoy the show. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Still Unbelievable. This time it's just Matthew and Andrew. I say just, we are the people who are always here. We are the important ones. Everybody else depends on us. So we are not just, we are. Andrew,
we are the we are.
We are the we are, yes. That sounds like a reference to something biblical, but it's not quite landing.
I am the I am.
I knew that. I was just being subtle. The listeners got it. You know, it's always funnier when you have to explain it.
Sorry. You know, it's been one of those kinds of days.
It's been one of those. So yeah, before we get on to our chit chat, how are you? Let's have personal updates because we haven't done one of those for a long time. Our lives have been turned upside down for the last basically the last year, really. We've had these clouds looming over our, I say private lives. It's not really our private lives. It's our professional lives. What's going on in yours?
So quite a lot. You know, I've got a number of development projects that I sort of stay with. The bigger news is starting a boating business, right? And that has not been easy to accomplish. It is surprisingly complicated to get approval from government agencies to operate boating services on waters that are government regulated. And we have been after this for well more than a year now. And we have finally gotten what I think is the last approval necessary. And we should begin operations on April 1st. But this is not an April Fool's joke. We are actually opening a boating operation. The revenue numbers look good for us where we'll be operating. It has been incredibly painful to, I think I told you before we got on mic, it feels like every day we're rescuing this small business from the trash can, right? Because we're just careening from one potential calamity to another, one roadblock after another that might stop us. Insurance and liability coverage, lawyers and contracts, governments and approval. Are the revenue numbers right for the business? It just seems like it's on and on. Do we have the right certifications and right training, and can we document those things? And it has just been it has been really eye-opening what small business owners go through to operate a sophisticated business. And I don't wish this on anybody.
Well, you know what the answer is? Just go cash only. Bypass everything.
Yes, of course. Now we could do that, but they could still just come and shut us down and say, well, we see your boat and we don't see your license in our database. And they just impound our assets. And I mean, at the end of the day, if we don't have a vessel in the water, we don't have a business. So
there is that.
But more interestingly, I think the thing that is right around the corner for you and me, and I don't know if you saw the headlines this morning, but I've already used it. So ChatGPT, and you've probably used ChatGPT at this point. ChatGPT.
I haven't. I've completely ignored it.
Okay.
We've talked about it a couple of times, and I've said, yeah, I'll go and check it out. But genuinely, as an IT professional, I have completely ignored it.
Might not want to ignore this headline, ChatGPT 4.
I've read some of the articles. Apparently, it's a mediocre coder.
I guess it's going to depend a lot on what you're asking it to do. But one of the things it can do is take a picture that you give it some web form that you want on a website, and it will actually generate code to accept the form. So
that's pretty. Oh, hang on, my dog is barking downstairs. Somebody dared to walk past my kitchen window, and the wife is away, so the dog has to let me know there's something important that I need to look at.
Right. So I think, it probably is mediocre, but mediocre will get the job done for a lot of businesses.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm going to be interested to see how that evolves, but even more than that, I'm going to be interested to see how GitHub's Copilot, that's GitHub's artificial intelligence pair coder, I'm going to be interested to see how it evolves as a result of the new technology underneath ChatGPT, because GitHub, they work with OpenAI. That's sort of the genesis of Copilot. And so certainly this is just going to get better as time goes on. And I'll be interested to see how we both are affected over the next 12 months to 5 years.
Yeah, it certainly will be quite interesting. I'm not worried about it, certainly in the narrow sphere of my particular work, but I can certainly see scenarios, and I've heard of scenarios where the kind of things that ChatGPT kicks out might be useful for the kind of work that I'm doing. So I'm developing quite a lot of new work in new code in VB and new screens in VB. There goes the dog again. And so I could see a scenario where I might pop onto it, put in a request for code to do a particular function, copy and paste that code into my code. There's the bones done, and then I do all the neat professional stuff around it.
Here's one of the interesting things that it can do. You can take quite a lot of code and feed it to ChatGPT to get it to understand the code, right? It will make an assessment of what the code does. And then you can ask it to give you something back that is a modification of what you fed it.
Right.
So I suspect that as the symbiotic relationship, as ChatGPT becomes more aware of intent, that symbiotic relationship is going to do nothing but strengthen, right? People like us, even if it doesn't do away with high-level coding, and I think low-level coding, there are some folks that are in trouble. But even if it doesn't do away with jobs like yours and mine, we will start using AI pair coders.
Yeah, I can see that in the future. I'm genuinely don't think that it's going to impact me much. But like you said, we'll see what happens in 5 years' time. Things might progress enough in the next 5 years that my thoughts on that might change. But I suspect that I'm old enough and close enough to retirement that I don't need to worry too much. And my immediate job security is there. But people are at the beginning of their coding careers might have a different idea. And they might be rethinking things. So moving then on to my work as well, because my work for the next 12 months, I think I've said it, is my employer was taken over by another business. So we're now part of a much bigger family of companies, which means that the software that I'm writing for my employer is now being rolled out to the other entities within this group of companies. So the user base which I support has tripled. Not quite overnight, but it's gradually we've been incorporating these other businesses into our software entity. The user base has grown and grown, and it will be triple by the middle of this year from where it was that I started. It's a big number of users. I've moved from supporting just under 200 users to around about 600 users. That's just in my software. That's on top of that, the help desk who have to do other things like, PC issues, networking issues, telephone issues, and all that kind of thing, are having to support all of those kinds of things. So it's a big change. So the users that we support have tripled, but the IT department that I work within has only doubled from what it was 4 years ago. So you can imagine the impact that that's had on the individual workloads that we have. Plus, on top of that, the way we work within IT has changed a lot. The way we used to work was much more relaxed. If somebody had an issue in the software, I would often or occasionally code to resolve that issue and release a new version of the software that night. It was quite rare that I would skip a day before. So we would generally release a new version of the software on a nightly basis, sometimes even during the day as well, if it was important enough.
Mm-hmm.
And now with all these other businesses involved in the software, we're tight, and with more developers coming online, because I used to be the only developer. Now I've got a couple of developers that I'm working with. We have to be much more rigid in what we're doing. So we've now got a beta system as well, where we roll out changes into for a few users to test first. We're reducing the number of times that we do a live build. We're trying to get that down to less than monthly, but at the moment it's going to be something like every 3 weeks. And so users who are used to getting a change done into their software literally sometimes that day, but usually within a couple of days, are now going to have to wait till the allotted time at which and sometimes they actually have to negotiate and fight for which build period their change is going to go into, and sometimes directors have it. So the whole process of releasing new versions of the software has changed significantly. So we now have to abide by process as well. I can't just have a phone call with someone, make a change to the software and release it. Everything has to go through a different level of approval and stuff like that. So less percentage of my time is coding. There is a greater increase in making sure that idea to process. Know that this is all good. I approve of all these changes. It's just a big change from the way I used to work when I joined the company 4 years ago. And we're much more busier. Much more busier? That's the wrong language. Much more busy as a result. God, you'd think I was an English person as well. So my role has got much more busy, and I'm not quite more stressed, but more full. My day is much more full as a result. I'm not having as many fun conversations with the users around and just talking things through, because everything's got a layer that has to get filtered through before it gets to me. So big changes to the way I work.
Those are, and I've seen this, because we talk offline,
yeah,
right? And I have watched the evolution from afar, sort of, and I could tell that this is becoming a big deal. I don't want to bore the users, but I do have 2 IT questions that I'll just go ahead and ask, and you can answer them as fast as you want. Do you guys have some sort of a ticketing system like Remedy, so that you're keeping track of user requests? And on the back end, are you guys doing some sort of DevOps where you where you have an automated build process, and the stuff that gets rolled in is goes through a DevOps kind of management?
Yes and no. So we have a ticketing system. So users email the help desk email account, whether it's a bug or a change request or whatever. So they get a ticket number with that, and then we tie the ticket number to a job ticket. And now that we're into a build cycle process, we negotiate with the business director what changes are going to go into each rotation. And then I that's my job list for the next 2 weeks, allowing a little bit of slack for urgent tickets that come in.
Right.
And I work out, and so those ticket numbers then go into our SharePoint system and our job list, and so that's what I work on. So everything is much more tied down. We don't have an automated back-end build system. All the builds are done manually. We do use GitHub. So we have changed it so that because we've now got a team of developers rather than just me, all code changes that get submitted into either beta or our live system go through an approval process. So one of the other developers has to look at the code and click yes, they approve of that code change going into the system. That motivates communication between the developers. We know what we're working on, we know what the changes are, and all changes need to have eyes on by another developer and go through. We're still working out a process of proper testing. At some point in the future, we may come up with a test suite so that every new build goes through an automated set of tests before we go, but that's probably a couple of years away, I imagine. And we don't have an auto build. Or after everything is synced into GitHub, we then do a pull into master or beta, and we do a manual click of the button to build it.
Right.
But I imagine that kind of automation behind the scenes will creep in as we tie down our process.
Am I right to think that your company may not be through with purchase and consolidation from other companies and that kind of thing?
Our parent company that bought us, they're constantly looking out for other businesses to buy, so there will be more. So as they buy new companies, those companies will get sucked into our system as well. So IT is going to only grow.
Right, and as it does, the need for more automation and more structure around build and more professionals just with their fingers in the pie will necessitate kinds of change. Areas of responsibility will sharpen up over time. It'll be interesting to keep watching it. We don't often do a tech section on Still Unbelievable, but we could do that show. We
could. Let us know if you want that, because it's not atheism based, it's not Christianity based, and people listen to us to hear us bashing Christianity. And we're almost we're at about 15 minutes in, and we're on the tech section. So
right.
There is more coming on users. There is more coming, listeners. We promise.
And speaking of letting us know, if you want to get in touch with us, and in fact, later on in the show, I think we're going to ask you to get in touch with us. The place to reach out to us is reasonpress@gmail.com. So that's REASONPRESS@gmail.com.
Yes, and so in terms of getting in touch with us, so let's use this as an opportunity to move on. There are various shows that we want to run. Two specifically that we want to run are something about the relationship to gun control. So somebody who's United States centric, specifically because that's the big country in the world with the gun problem. Somebody who knows about that, got experience about that, or if you've got friends who you think has something really useful to say about that, please get in touch. We really are looking for somebody to have that show. And the other one is on abortion. It's about a year now I've been looking to do a show on abortion. I've got a little bit of stuff to one side, but I'm trying to do some more. The whole Roe versus Wade over in the United States was quite some time ago now. But it's still a show that we want to do. If you are somebody, or you know somebody who has got suitable knowledge or experience in that area, please get in touch, reasonpress@gmail.com. That is absolutely the show that we want to do. We want to do it right, and we want to do it well. So please get in touch on that.
If you are a doctor, specifically an OBGYN in the United States, and you have thoughts about how women's reproductive rights may or may not have been compromised as a result of the recent Supreme Court ruling, we would love to have you on. And you can come on the show anonymously. We have done this in the past where guests don't want their professional names used, so you can come on anonymously. If it's necessary, we could even apply a filter if you were worried that your voice was distinct enough that some of your professional colleagues might recognize you. We can work through those issues, but we really would like to have someone with legitimate credentials to come on and talk about this. And you don't have to be the only guest. It can even be a panel show, if that's what you prefer, just to further help anonymize you. But we really want the professional view to start being aired in public, because I don't think there's enough of that.
that plug done, and please do bear that in mind, listeners. So where are we? We're in the middle of March 2023. This episode will go out at some point at the tail end of April, I imagine, maybe even into the beginning of May. But we're recording this the middle of March. And my dog is going mental in the background, so apologies for that. I'm at home alone this weekend because for those of you who may or may not remember, my daughter's off at university at the moment, and my wife is spending the weekend down with my daughter. So that's why Andrew and I are doing this extra special show. So I'm home alone. It's just me and the dog. And as you can hear, she hates me so much. It's really important that I come and look out the window with her. So if you hear stuff in the background, that is what's going on. Someone is daring to walk along the footpath or drive a car past my house. And she is trying to let me know that it is really important for me to stand on the windowsill with her and look out and make noises at them. So that's what's going on there. Right. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So for context, yeah. So in the middle of March, it is 6 weeks now since I had my virgin appearance on the premiere podcast Unbelievable with Justin Briley, and I had a interesting chat with Mike DeVigilio on his book Uninvented. Justin has released 6 episodes since that showing, and of those 6 episodes, 2 of them he's read out feedback, and none of that feedback has featured the show that I was on. I was deeply hoping that before he came on that this evening's show would have some feedback on Mike and myself's performance. But yet again, I'm disappointed. There's been no feedback on the latest show. So I have another week to wait to see whether or not there's going to be feedback on my episode with Mike DeVigilio. Andrew, at this time, that show has been out for a while. There's been quite a few people talking about it. Quite a few people have fed back to us about it. We've also recorded and I've edited. We have recorded our own show with Mike, but I've not yet finished editing it. That is one of my jobs to do this weekend at home on my own, is to finish editing that. The listeners will have heard that show by the time they listen to this, but it's not yet been published at the time of recording. So your thoughts on that episode and then the later conversation that we had with Mike. Go in whichever order you want to go.
Okay. I find talking about this at the moment is somewhat difficult, because when we did the show with Mike.
That's the show you and I recorded with Mike on Still Unbelievable.
Right.
Yeah.
On Still, look.
Episode 92, I think it was.
Okay. Let me talk about, before I go there, let me talk about your appearance on Unbelievable. I was going to say, as you were talking about it a moment ago, you're never going to hear feedback from Justin about that show with Mike. He's never going to read out any comments, any feedback that he gets. Because
you're being brave saying that. You're being very brave.
I don't mind. Because it's okay. Look, man, I am starting a small business. This is not brave. This is not brave. He's not going to do it. In all of the years that I listened to Unbelievable, and I don't listen as often now as I used to, by the time you get 6 weeks down, the show has vanished into the mist of the past. And Justin can't address the show that you had with Mike, because in the annals of Unbelievable history, it goes down as one of the worst, if not the worst, Christian showing in the show's history. In fact, in the years that I've listened, I've only heard one worse showing by a Christian guest. I don't remember her name, but she was the one that talked about having dreams, and she saw the fluorescent blue arm of Jesus in her dream.
I don't remember that one.
She was, boy, if I could recall her name, I could find the show. This sort of crazy. It is where Mike was, not in terms of content, but in terms of poor delivery. In fact, Justin spent that episode rescuing Mike, and it was obvious to everyone. It was obvious to everyone.
Now, it's funny you said that. You're not the only person who said that directly to me. And I didn't feel that during the recording. Maybe it's because I was just so focused on the discussion that I genuinely didn't notice that. And then I listened to it again when it went out because I wanted to see if I could notice any bits that had been cut, unfortunately, but I didn't notice any of those. And I didn't feel it again either. So I'm not seeing it. And maybe it's because of how closely I was involved with it. But I don't see it. And somebody under the YouTube comments as well said exactly the same thing. But I don't see it.
I came to that independently, but we have another friend over at Skeptics and Seekers, David Johnson. He felt that way. But I think it's fair to say that in our offline conversations with some of the production staff at Unbelievable, if you will, I think that somebody there felt the same way. And you were in that conversation with me. And I think that there was implicit agreement even from that quarter. I'm not saying that it wasn't gently done, but I think it was done.
Okay, fair enough. I'll just accept that that's the impression that listeners got. I think my involvement was too close and my focus was too close, so I just didn't notice.
Well, we did the YouTube show, the comments show, but under those YouTube comments, it's not like there was a world of support for Mike's appearance. There were plenty of people who said, "Oh, look at that horrible atheist," and how bad he did. But there was one comment, and I can almost quote it. I can come really close. This person said, "This is an interesting new way to defend the gospel," or words to that effect.
Yeah, that wasn't it? Yeah.
But the person didn't say Mike. It wasn't as if they were praising Mike's his appearance on the show, his conduct and delivery and his content, right? It was just, well, that seems like an interesting way to defend the gospel, and maybe I'll look into it more. And so, we probably went through 50 comments in that show.
Yeah, we went through quite a few comments in that don't read the comments show, didn't we?
Yeah. I mean, there were like 3 pages of comments, and there's very little support for Mike in that show. So that's my thought on Unbelievable.
Yeah, and the basic premise. So, just in case there's some listeners out there that aren't aware of what it is that we're talking about. So Mike wrote a book called Uninvented.
Right.
And the basic premise of the book is that the Bible, and especially the gospel stories, though not uniquely the gospel stories, could not be invented. There's details in them, there's structure in them that does not comport to invention. And therefore, if they can't be invented, there must be some truth to them. And I have to be honest, I find that as a premise ridiculous, laughable. Even I don't think even as a Christian I would have given that idea seriously. And to give you the kind of idea of the Christians that I have in my friendship circle, because, dear listeners, my wife is still a Christian, my wife is still a churchgoer, my wife is actively involved in her church, she even preaches a few times. Oh no, I have a progressive Christian wife. Wow, no wonder she's not a real Christian. And I like the minister of her church. In fact, we have this ongoing joke that whenever I do turn up to church, one of us will say as part of our introduction, still haven't burst into flames yet. So we have a good, friendly relationship, and I really like him. And when I told him that I was going to be on Unbelievable, he thought, oh, wow, cool. What are you going to be talking about? And I told him, and his mouth closed and he looked at me blank and his face just told me, what the fuck? And that is the kind of reaction that the Christians I know had to that as a premise. Now, it might be the way I tell it, because most of the time when I try to tell a joke, it falls flat. But that is the response that the Christians I know tended to have when I said, this is the conversation I'm going to have.
Right. I honestly can't think of a religious text, a sacred text, if you will, that I couldn't read with the same glasses that Mike is suggesting for the Old and New Testament. Right?
Yeah.
And I've read a lot of religious texts. Read the Book of Mormon, and hey, I got to read that one in English because the original language was English. So you can't say you didn't read it in Greek or you didn't read it in Arabic, so you didn't read the real. No. I've read the Bible. I've read the Book of Mormon. I've read a lot of Eastern texts. I can't find one that I couldn't read with those glasses. With what's the V word? What's the crazy verisimilitude? Right? That these details are so compatible that they must be true. But Mike he makes me shake my head because he will say things, and you'll hear it if you listen to the show with Mike. If you've already listened, you will have heard Mike say, "Well, the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac is so outrageous that it must be true." Now, so it just seems like this constant, ridiculous special pleading. First, the details seem so compatible that they must be true. There's verisimilitude, right? But then when the stories are outrageous, they're so outrageous that they must be true. And I shake my head in bewilderment. And by the way, you may forever refer to me from now on. I am the spiky rationalist. Hello, I'm Andrew, the spiky rationalist.
That you are, and there is a story to that. It doesn't come across in any of the recordings, but at the tail end of the recording that Mike and I did on Unbelievable with Justin, Mike very cheekily said, "And when am I going to be on your podcast, Matthew?" And I said, "Sure, you can come on my podcast, but I do have to warn you, Andrew, my co-host, can be quite spiky, and you've adopted that loving comment I made about you. You've embraced it tightly like it was a cuddly toy and said, I want it, I want that."
Well, you know me. It is not my first hope to be spiky with a guest or to be overtly rude to our guests. I don't want that. On the other hand, I am the kind of person who can be agitated, maybe more easily than others. I don't know. I don't know. I am the person that I am. And in our conversation with Mike, I will just say, as for this one, this interaction bit, I did take pains through that show to pause on a pretty frequent basis, try to turn down the heat, try to get to the heart of the disagreement. If Mike thought that I was misrepresenting him, I'd say, please correct me. Right? Tell me where I've gone wrong. Because here on Still Unbelievable, it seems to me that what we have been as a show is one that is genuinely trying to find where our worldview of non-believers can be compatible with the views of believers. It's not just bashing Christianity, though. It's fun to say, right? Well, yeah, we're the atheists that bash Christianity, but I think our history stands us in pretty good stead.
Yes, I was thinking about that. We've had quite a few Christians on the show. We've done several Questions with Christians shows. We've had individual Christian guests on various occasions talking about various topics, and they've all been fun shows to one extent or another. Yes, we've disagreed. Yes, there's been a bit of back and forth, but all in all, I've enjoyed every show that we've done with Christians. But with Mike, it was different. I felt that you were getting really quite frustrated, and there were points during the recording where I genuinely wasn't sure if I needed to step in and just say, shut up, both of you. Can we just back off a little bit? It really got to that bit where I was in my mind going, what do I do now? What do I do now? Do I need to message Andrew and say, back off, dude? Do I need to jump in and distract? There are multiple points where I felt really quite uncomfortable as your co-host, wondering what I needed to do or if I needed to intervene. And I've never felt that with any other guest that we've had on Still Unbelievable. It was a new place for me, and we've been doing this for over 4 years now. We're driving towards our 100th episode on Still Unbelievable, and that's not counting the various episodes that we did on Ask an Atheist Anything as well prior to that,
and the few on Proscenium.
Yeah, so that was new ground for me, and I was very definitely out of my comfort zone during that interaction.
So I think it's fair comment. There were times in my interaction with Mike where I felt like he was being dishonest. I felt like he was prevaricating. He was avoiding what were pretty simple interactions. And
avoiding or misunderstanding?
Both. More misunderstanding, and I guess we'll talk about his blog posts here in a few minutes. And I think do you agree? Let me not set you up to agree with me. It was just, do you agree? You heard the show, you were there. Do you think that Mike has fairly represented our side in his follow-on blog posts?
Okay, so let's just set the context here. So listeners, Mike has his own website, and MikeDeVigilio.com, and he's done a couple of blog posts. He's promised to do a third one on his interaction with us. So your question fairly represented us.
Right.
Yes and no. And
okay.
The reason why I'm saying yes and no is because no, from our perspective as atheists, I don't think it's an accurate representation of what we were intending. But I'm going to give him grace and say yes in the context of that's how he received it. So he's honestly representing his position of how he felt it went, but it doesn't align with our position of how we felt it went.
So I don't know if we're in the same place or different places. I'll tell you how I've read Mike's 2 posts up to this point. First, as far as I can remember, one of the things he said in the first post was I accused him of putting up red herrings. I don't think I ever accused Mike of red herrings. I did accuse him of a popularity fallacy at least once, maybe more than once. Not sure, but those are the trivial bits. Mike's understanding of the rationality that I was presenting to him is as different from the rationality as I support as it can possibly be. I didn't see anything in his writing that adequately represented my notion of rationality. So I'll give you just one example. Mike talked about me presenting the reality that I propose, the reality that I support, the reality that I talk about, as somehow being that I'm absolutely convinced about it. Well, I'm quite positive that I never said that. In fact, the whole purpose for having these discussions is to find out what is most likely. We've been here over and over. I am not the person that believes that that there is an absolute truth out there. But if you read Mike's blog posts, that's what I get accused of. That I am absolute in my conviction, that the evidence that I have must be the only evidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that's what was said in the podcast. Now, I did try, and this is one of those places where I became frustrated with Mike. He has written a book. He's gone on Unbelievable to defend the book. He came on Still Unbelievable to talk about the book, right? And yet when we get down to that part of the show, Mike says, "Well, I'm not trying to convince anybody." And that felt very dishonest to me. It felt very dishonest. And he goes on, even in his first blog, he says he's got this notion of capital T truth that you can read all about. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go and read Mike's blog. And so he's got this notion of truth. And yet at the bottom of his post, and on Still Unbelievable, he says, "Look, I'm not a professional at this. I'm just a salesman." Well, what are you doing here? I mean, I'm not saying that you can't be a salesman and write a book, but you're here to talk about the book, right? And so to then say that you're not here to defend what's in the book, it either means that Mike didn't understand what this arena is all about, or he didn't understand Still Unbelievable. But I don't believe either one of those are true, because he came on Unbelievable to debate you head to head with Justin as a moderator.
And on the subject of the book, then, we've both read the book. We know a couple of other people who've read the book. What's your feeling about the book itself?
Okay.
Should I just start by quoting one of our friends about the book while you process that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So one of our friends said about the book, and this is somebody who is a voracious reader, consumes books probably quicker than I could consume a page, to be quite honest about it, and has read a lot of Christian books. And he said of the Christian books that he's read, it was the worst, which is quite a call to the bottom.
I've got a picture of that guy's bookshelf. By the way, if you're wondering, you can read him in the book Still Unbelievable. I have something approaching infinite respect for Michael Brady. I know the kinds of things he reads, and that's a high bar It really is a high bar. But I think he's right about Uninvented. I have read the only Christian book I've ever read that's worse than Mike's book is a book that was put out by Ray Comfort.
You read the book by Ray Comfort?
I was asked to read a book by Ray Comfort and provide some responses to someone in an outer circle of acquaintance to me, someone who put a lot of stock in something that Ray Comfort had written. And so I was asked to read this short book and provide some commentary on where I thought Ray had gone wrong.
Please tell me that the reward for doing this was a hot date. Please tell me that you didn't do this for any other reason than a really hot date.
That would not be far wrong, actually.
I could sink that low.
Not far wrong. So I mean this. I find Ray Comfort to be obnoxiously poorly reasoned.
And intentionally and deliberately dishonest to a level that Mike isn't.
So that was, I agree. That is why I put Ray Comfort slightly lower than Mike, but only slightly. Mike's book,
Okay, let's take this from a different angle, because I'm pretty sure that if I read a book by Ray Comfort, I would read it thinking he doesn't really believe this. He's writing this to sell copy. Whereas reading Mike's book, bad as though I thought it was, I never once felt that Mike was being dishonest in his presentation.
I agree. I agree. And yet I am sincerely convinced that the brand Unbelievable, not Still Unbelievable, but Justin's show.
Premiere Unbelievable, yeah.
Premiere Unbelievable. I believe that Justin did that brand a disservice by having Mike on. The show is better than the book.
Yeah. But then that's what Justin needs to do. He needs to bring new people on. He can't keep turning around the same people all the time. He needs to have fresh blood, so to speak.
Yeah, I know that that's true. And by the way, we have the same problem, don't we? We all podcasts that have guests, we share those issues. And somehow Mike made it up to Still Unbelievable. So I guess I should be more circumspect.
Hey, we're still tiny enough that if somebody says, I'd like to be on your show, I don't think I'm going to turn. Okay, there's a small list of people who I would very definitely turn down, but Mike wasn't one of them.
Mm. And by the way, just as a teaser for the future listeners, someone will be on Still Unbelievable in the not distant future that you'll be glad to listen to. We will have an academic on who is a college professor, a New York Times #1 best-selling author multiple times. In fact, it is an author and presenter that is in the same category as Christopher Hitchens in terms of name recognition in the atheist community. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but that will happen in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And it may even be that after that recording, that show gets to jump the queue and get published pretty right away. So be looking out. There you go. There's the plug.
All right then. Do.
So back to Mike. My ultimate problem with Mike is that in the end, what he defended his view with on Still Unbelievable, over and over and over, is I've never believed anything else, and I believe this as strongly as I've ever believed anything. I mean, that's the end of this. And he says, I'm not a presuppositionalist. Yet, as far as I could tell, and I wonder what you think, but as far as I could tell, he defended his view with nothing but presuppositionalism on the show.
Yeah, I was intrigued by that. I didn't want to push that too hard, but it felt the same to me as well. He multiple times he said he's not a presupper, but he did sound at some points like he was, which is presumably why he needed to deny it, because it did feel that way. I'm on the same page as you with that.
So
and he did also, in the conversation that we had, sorry, I'm just moving on very, very slightly. In the conversation that we had, he did also, I asked the question, or you asked the question, and then we moved the conversation on, and we didn't dwell there, which I think is probably a good thing. But he did affirm that Adam and Eve as literal characters, and presumably literally created characters as well. We didn't flesh that out in any detail. We just let that go and move on. And the reason why I brought that up was the presuppositional thing and the Genesis literalism thing quite often go together, hand in glove. You don't get one without the other very often.
I am sorely disappointed in the show in one sense. And that is that whatever Mike's actual views are, whatever he wanted listeners and readers to take away from Uninvented, remains a complete mystery to me. I don't understand Mike's defense of the gospel. And as a show host, regardless of how the show sounds in terms of verbal tone, I did my level best. I worked harder to try to get to the heart of Mike's arguments and to the heart of understanding his position than I have ever worked with any other guest on Still Unbelievable.
Yes, I tried to do the same as well, reading it, and I struggled. I found bits of the book really hard work. I simply didn't engage, and that's why I made the comment right early on the Unbelievable episode as part of the introduction, that I didn't think that I was the target audience for the book, and why I asked for clarification on who the target audience was. And that's partly because I just struggled to engage with much of the book, and where the book did address skeptics, and specifically the numerous references to anti-supernatural bias, I found myself thinking this isn't a fair representation of the way we are thinking and the way I think. And I've just found that whole thing problematic. So yeah, exactly the same as you've just said. I tried really, really hard to engage with the book, because even as a Christian, I think I would have struggled to engage with the book.
Yeah, and so anti-supernatural bias, that's a good place to be for a moment, because it gives us some meat of Mike's argument to try to dig into, rather than just talking about the personality conflict, which I don't think is the important part of this, right? So anti-supernatural bias. Mike's view from the book is that the supernatural and the natural are the same thing, because it's all supported by this creator, by God, the Christian God. For me, that's fine as far as it goes. I don't have a problem with someone offering that idea. I think that's perfectly acceptable as something to engage with. So if they're all the same from my perspective, and I don't know if we got to this bit on Still Unbelievable, and maybe we should have, but it was 2.5 hours and I don't remember the show. with perfect clarity because
yes, and very quickly on the subject of that, yes, we record every 2.5 hours, but I don't know how long it's going to be because I haven't finished editing yet, but you'll obviously know because you'll have listened to it now. I suspect that will end up at around about 2 hours by the time I'm done editing.
Sure. So engaging with the anti-supernatural bias.
Yes, I think we really need to cover that topic.
Yeah. So for my part, and I don't know if you're in the same place, but it seems to me that if everything is part of this larger whole, that the supernatural and the natural are really just parts of each other, okay, fine. Then I see no reason to think that the tools that we use for detecting the natural world and understanding it should then have some sort of artificial limit that prevents us from exploring the supernatural. After all, I think that is what we mean when we say that things are somehow unified, right? What we're saying is that there's some way of getting at all of the bits and pieces with some set of unified tools.
Yeah.
And so I don't understand Mike's view there. I don't have an anti-supernatural bias. I do have a familiarity with the tools that I use to understand the world around me, and I think I use them reasonably well. Certainly not as well as people who are better trained than I am. But if there's a God out there, and the natural and the supernatural are really just things that are in the same larger superset, then for me, God should be much more clearly identifiable in our everyday lives and through something more than I see God in the beauty of the sunrise.
Yeah, there was a feeling at some points of look at the trees, which is quite poor. So my response to that is, yes, I have a bias. It's not anti-supernatural. My bias is anti-poorly evidenced or anti-inappropriately evidences. The reasons for me rejecting anything supernatural are the same reasons that I reject the existence of Yeti and other ape-like hominids which are living in remote areas, lonely and unfound by humans, except for by weirdos who don't have cameras. I'm also anti-aliens having visited Earth and done anal investigations of people who typically have not enough teeth and not enough blood in their drug stream.
Now, see, you've quit preaching and gone to meddling now. Now,
yes.
Now you're talking about my people. You're talking about my people, man.
Yep, I am absolutely. I'm also anti people who think that the Twin Towers on 9/11 2001 were brought down by anything other than planes and jet fuel. There were no mini nukes in the buildings. There were no missiles attached to those planes, and there were no other explosives previously planted. And the same reason why I reject all of those things is purely and simply there is a deficiency of evidence supporting it, and B, a preponderance of evidence of the other. I'm anti all those things for that one reason. And Mike is just simply focusing on, you don't accept my justification for my God, therefore you are anti-supernatural. And it's his inability to get out of that focus and see the wider explanation that is creating this discrepancy.
So we talked a bit in the show with Mike about the New Testament. And Mike, like a lot of Christians, so this isn't unique to Mike in any way, but Mike uses the New Testament as evidence. And by the way, other people do. We just other people do as well. We just had Jonathan McLatchie on, right? And there are places where Jonathan thinks that certain types of claims in the New Testament provide evidence for the conclusion about those claims. That's maybe not well enough nuanced, but our listeners will hear that show with Jonathan, and they can draw their conclusions about what I'm saying here. I will simply say that even with quite well done high level explanation of that kind of thing that Jonathan McLatchie presents, I remain unconvinced that the New Testament can be evidence of the claims that are offered in its pages.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a line that I'm unable to go over.
Did you hear Jonathan that same way? Am I misrepresenting him, being disingenuous? Hopefully not.
You're possibly stating his position too simply. Jonathan is a very cerebral person. He's very intelligent, thinks things through very well, and I think what he's doing, I think, is taking parts from different bits of the Bible and connecting them together and saying all these different bits from different people, which somehow weave a single thread, can't be an accidental product of a book that's been edited post hoc the way that we think it is. So he's definitely a lot more nuanced than what you've just said.
Okay, so I accept every bit of that. I agree with every bit of that. And I will simply say that in my view, in response to that exact line of reasoning, I am unaware of anything that post hoc editing can't accomplish. So it would be quite hard to just say post hoc editing can't get us. No, look, I know that the tools of historians can be quite reliable. And so there are things that we can say about the history of documents, about the way textual criticism is approached, about geography and archaeology, that are not subject to post hoc editing. But I think the truth of this is somewhat different. I think what happens with the Bible in post hoc editing is not that we're trying to edit out facts about the world. What has been done with the post hoc editing is making the story fit whatever we find and hoping that will be enough. And so my point is sort of this. Suppose we come up with something tomorrow that upends some fact about Jewish culture, or upends some fact about first century culture. What we will see is Christians editing the Christian story to fit that new and heretofore unknown and contradictory fact, and they will move right along. So why do I say that? Find a position that some group of Christians doesn't take. You want a group of Christians that say they're trying to save abortion rights in the United States, you can find them. You want a group of Christians who say that Christianity did away with slavery, that it is Christian values that eliminated slavery in the United States, you can find them. But the point is that this is a rewriting of history to massage an inconvenient fact, right? And so I think post hoc editing is responsible for the story we have, regardless of the evidence.
Yes, I agree. And I think part of the problem is it's almost impossible to prove that hypothesis. Yes, we can say that the documents have been adjusted and changed over time. And yes, we can say with really high confidence that documents, especially biographical documents of that time period, regularly and often and habitually contained invented fictional narratives. We know those two facts to be true.
Sure.
I think part of the strength of the position that Jonathan takes is that some of the things that he points to are almost inconsequential. They're really small details. They're sort of like sideline details which align well with it being literally true, but are so sideline that they're the kind of things that you would not expect detail to be attended to if the documents were being invented. You'd either have to be a really good paying attention author, which is reasonable to expect that those people weren't, in order to get these details into that level of alignment. And I think that's part of the challenge. So I think Jonathan would probably, and Jonathan, if you hear this, it will be great to hear confirmation from you. I think the dichotomy that Jonathan is drawing here is, if it's not true, either somebody intentionally wove this, knowing it to be entirely fiction, with these really tiny details in it, all intentionally, to put as much effort into writing this fiction to the kind of level that people write novels, and knowing it was all, while at the same time also knowing that this was espousing supernatural stuff that people were believing. So it was intentional fraud from people who are going to benefit from intentionally fraudulently manipulating gullible people into a religious practice, or it was an accidental editing error of such proportions that it is almost impossible that could happen by accident. And I think those are the two things we've got to weigh if we're going to take the route that these are fictionalized.
So it's interesting, right? Because I'm not sure that covers all the possible bases. I'm sure Jonathan wouldn't think so either, actually. That either people are lying or it's true.
Yeah.
Right. And it's also not true that it's just one person. And so I know Jonathan well enough to know that he would think those are oversimplifications, right? And you know him that well too. But these aren't the only possible explanations. Today, just this morning, I was speaking to a friend who believes he had a near-death experience. He claims he was clinically dead in the hospital, and he has a belief in a God that is Christian aligned, not perfectly Christian, but Christian aligned. And he has this belief today because of this near-death experience. And he won't even consider the idea that this experience that he had could be from any other source other than the God that he thinks exists. What is my point? It's possible to believe a thing but be entirely mistaken about it.
Yeah.
And it's also possible that some people just invented crap to put in the Bible. If you think I'm wrong, look at the last chapter of the book of Mark. It's just there and it's invented out of whole cloth. It's human invented. It's the last, Mark 16:10 and following, 22, the last 12 verses of Mark 16, if I remember correctly. But it's not the only place that we see this. It's not the only place that we see this. And with that idea in mind, if we can just invent part of the Great Commission out of whole cloth, that's Mark 16, 15, and 16, for those of you that are wondering what I'm talking about. It's the go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, and he that believes and is baptized will be saved. That kind of passage, Mark 16, 15, 16. We see the Great Commission again back over in Matthew 28, 19, and 20, if memory serves. But the point is that the Great Commission in Mark can't be attributed to the original author of Mark. Why is that important? Well, in our show with Jonathan, Justin and I had a conversation about miracles. And that conversation about miracles went roughly this way. What about Jesus healing the paraplegic? If Jesus can do that, surely that is a reasonable defense of Jesus being of Jesus' claim about being the Son of God being true, and that Jesus had, by virtue of the ability to heal the lame, the right to claim that he could forgive sins. Well, we know, we're quite sure, that there are things in the New Testament that are just invented out of whole cloth. Now, maybe you say, but surely, Andrew, not every claim of a miracle is invented out of whole cloth. Well, in fact, I think they are. But my challenge is much more subtle than that, and much more humble than that. If you think that it's possible that some are actual miracles and some are not, that some are made up and some are attestations of true events, then give me the way to decide which are which.
Yeah. And if I may use this opportunity to jump back to the conversation I had with Mike on Unbelievable and some of the research that I was doing during that, while I was doing the research for that, and I brought it up on the Unbelievable show, was I found a story. It's in one of the Gospels that's not considered canon. It might be the Gospel of Judas, but don't necessarily quote me on that. But I did find that there is reference to an account of a teenage Jesus killing one of his friends and then immediately raising him back to life again. Now, I fully appreciate why Christians don't include that story as part of the miracles of Jesus, because it is not the kind of story that you would apply to a perfect God, even a God that's taken on human form. And that kind of story,
so that might be the perfect teenager, though.
Absolutely. It is exactly the sort of thing a teenager with those kinds of skills would do.
Sure.
But it doesn't work for the backstory of Jesus. It spoils it somewhat, and it immediately gives license to any doubters. Now, why is it that I was never aware of that story as a Christian? Why is it that there are many Christians who have never heard that story before? Because Christians don't talk about it. They completely ignore all the inconvenient narratives or the other, inverted commas, gospels of Jesus, which make it clear, which have these kinds of things which are so obviously fictionalized. They can't have those there. They have to expunge those from history as vociferously and as neatly as possible, so that all they're left with is the believable stuff. And that is why we have the Bible, and that is why we don't have anything else.
Right, but you've made exactly the right point there, right? Because it is impossible to imagine based on the typical view of the Christian God, right? So he's all powerful, all knowing, all present, he's all of everything, right? So in that sense, then, it would be impossible to imagine anything that a God could not do. You might say, but it's outside of his character to do a thing like kill a person and raise them immediately from the dead. But I can think of a context where that would be perfectly in keeping with the character of Jesus, and it's not necessarily something that he would have to do as a team. If it were to confirm his ministry in any way, that would be beneficial to people watching, there would in some sense be nothing wrong with it from the traditional Christian perspective. So let's say Jesus needs to do two things: demonstrate the power over life and death, and this person's soul is important to Jesus because it's a personal friend, like John the Baptist was, or Peter, right? And so to march the gospel story along, this person needs to die and be raised to see the truth that Jesus is the Savior. These are things easily in keeping with the Christian story. So my point is this: given a miracle claim outside of the canonical New Testament, I can't imagine a claim that couldn't be accomplished by the Jesus character in the pages of the canonical New Testament. What is outside that character's ability? Nothing, as far as I can tell.
No.
So when you read the non-canonical books, like the Gospel of Thomas, you're left wondering, at least I am left wondering, what of this, if the miracle claims are true, right? What of this did the Jesus character actually do? What miracles did he actually do? But the reason they're not canonical is just because they got the story around them wrong, right? But you should ask the other question. Is the reason these things weren't included because Jesus just isn't the character that the eventual curators of the story didn't want us to see? Did the curators of the story need a different Jesus, and that's why those books were excluded?
Yep. If you don't include everything, you don't get the whole story.
Right. Now, I'm sure Jonathan will have some things to say about that, having to do with why some books are in the canon and others are not. It seems to me, even if you say, okay, the whole Gospel of Thomas doesn't belong, don't you have to do more than that? Because if the tools of canonization are any good, what it should be able to do is guarantee which miracles were authentic and which aren't, right? And we should be able to read non-canonical stories and dissect, maybe there's a chapter that belongs. Maybe there's a story that belongs. Maybe there's a proverb that belongs. Maybe there's a parable, like the parables in Matthew 13 or later in the book of Luke, right? If the tools of canonization are to be meaningful, shouldn't we be able to do the job of looking at the non-canonical Gospels and deciding which truths should be adopted into the canon? And if we can't do that, you can color me unconvinced.
And I think that really is part of the problem here. It's the method by which Christians have decided what is believable and what is not is invisible to us. It's opaque to us. We can't access that. There is no documented methodology which is shown to be reliable, which enables us to determine what is believable and what is not. And I think this is an Achilles heel of Christianity, which we ought to find a way of poking at quite a lot more, because all they've got is this word that Mike loves to use in his book, this verisimilitude. It reads like it's true. Well, duh, guess what? There's a lot of fiction that reads like it could be true.
Right. Look, I love urban fantasy. I love urban fantasy because it puts the characters in a familiar place. Right. So it's great.
Yeah, and that is the problem. We have no way of getting there. And that is why Christianity cannot be considered to be believable. In fact, it is not only is it unbelievable, but it is still unbelievable.
Nicely done.
Cue ending music, and that's a cut.
Right, just drop the mic right there. Every day I think a little bit about this story because we podcast so often. We're always doing some kind of research, some sort of lead up to the next show, right? So we do this every day, at least a little. And I look at the Bible story, and what I don't see is the tapestry that Christians want non-believers to see. I don't see a unified story. I don't see a unified scheme of redemption. I don't see prophecies that all point to Jesus. I don't see a Jesus and a unified set of apostles that are pointing to a necessary kind of end time where we all face some kind of judgment. I don't see that unification. I know others do. But it's not there for me. And I tried. I tried for years to see it. I will tell you honestly, right here, that even as a Christian, when preachers would talk about the unifying thread through the Bible being the scheme of redemption, right? So from the foundation of the world in Genesis 1, we had this unifying golden thread that runs through the Old Testament and the New Testament, leading to the cross and to eventual judgment. I don't see that unifying scheme of redemption. And I always struggled with that. Now, I could look at the New Testament and say, we need to hear, believe, repent, confess, whatever, right? Whatever your Sunday school version of redemption is. But I didn't see that the New Testament's scheme of redemption was necessarily predicated on the Old Testament scheme of redemption. We've got a better covenant because we got rid of the blood of bulls and goats. And that sort of type and anti-type relationship, I always thought was stressed to breaking. So anyway, little theology. I just don't buy it. What about you? When you were a Christian, did you think about type, anti-type relationships that Adam and Christ are types of each other? Did you see the story of the flood as a type, ultimately relating to baptism being a vehicle for salvation? Did you see the Jewish law as some kind of type, anti-type relationship with the commandments of Jesus? Did you see any of that?
I don't think I was that sophisticated, if I'm honest. I certainly saw the analogy in a couple of places, but I just saw that as the beauty of God's creation threading it through. I don't think I saw it much more metaphysically than that, because I was very much a literalist.
I guess we need a theology expert. I tried that. Apparently, I'm never going to be one. But this sort of, we ended up talking about our show with Jonathan, sort of intermixed with our show with Mike. I'll say this in defense of Jonathan. If there was a version of Christianity that I could accept, it would be much more aligned with the kind of thing that Jonathan says than what Mike presented. I appreciate the cerebral approach that Jonathan takes. I don't bias conclusions for reasons previously mentioned. But in the end, the Christian project is lost if you have to be Jonathan McLatchie to go to heaven.
Yes, not everybody is that clever.
Exactly my point. And by the way, I think Jonathan is clever. And I think he's a good dude. It was nice to have him here on Still Unbelievable. He kind of dresses the joint up, right? But if you've got to have Jonathan's horsepower to get Christianity right, the scheme of redemption is wrong.
Yeah, I'm absolutely there. Yeah, if that's what you need in order to make sense of some of the confusing stuff that's in there, then it is not the clear message from God. It is, as you have said multiple times and said with Mike, it is more complex. It is complex to the point of being beyond design.
Yes. And there's another problem. So let's say that you don't have to be Jonathan McLatchie. You can just believe Jonathan's version of events. I still think the scheme of redemption is broken. Because at that point, you're not believing for yourself based on the evidence that you were able to accumulate and come to a rational, wholehearted alignment of your will with the will of God. That's not what you get. What you get is, well, Jonathan sounds pretty good, so I guess I'll go with that. I'm not trying to be overly dismissive.
No, you're not. But there are Christians who are like that, who just accept what those who have studied it greatly say and take their word on it. And they will probably draw an analogy between what they're doing with respected theologians and theist philosophers like Jonathan McLatchie, like Professor N.T. Wright, and like numerous others of that ilk. They would say that they're doing with them very similar things to what we do with the evolutionary biologists and the cosmologists who we quote and look up to and accept the words of.
That's interesting, because it's one of the things that Mike did not understand. And I don't know if he does today. We have Christian authority figures that Christians are willing to accept. Atheists do too. Don't get me wrong here, folks, because both sides do this, right? But I tried to explain to Mike, and hopefully this didn't get cut out. But you do the editing and do what you need to do, because that was a rough episode. I don't envy you. But I tried very clearly and very distinctly to explain to Mike that proper skepticism, in my view, and the skepticism that I promote and try to practice, is that skepticism that only promotes a position to the degree that I understand it. So maybe Lawrence Krauss, I know he's persona non grata because of misbehavior. I'm aware of it. I'm not responsible for it, and I won't take his work away from him. Maybe Lawrence Krauss is wrong about a universe from nothing. But when I defend something similar to what Lawrence Krauss wrote about, I'm not defending Lawrence Krauss. I am only defending the degree to which I understood what he wrote. And I don't know if Mike ever understood that. And in his blog posts since, it doesn't seem to me that he got that message.
No, maybe not.
What about you? Where do you draw the line? Do you have the same sort of epistemological view that I did? So when you hear Phil Halper talk, and damn, everybody should hear more Phil talk. Do you accept what he says to a higher degree than what you understand him, if you see what I mean?
Yes, I do, because I trust the way that he talks. But I think there's a difference between the way scientifically literate people speak and the way biblically literate people speak about things. When I listen to science podcasts talking about cosmology or biology, and they talk about a study and they talk about what we know, very, very often, to the point of it's almost a mantra, there's this, they say it explicitly, but you also hear it implied in their language. They say more research is needed. They say this is interesting, this is strange, this could change the way that we think about certain things. More research is needed. There's a phrase, the most important word in science is not eureka, it's that's
yes
funny.
Yes. Yep.
That's
so odd.
Yeah, why did that happen? That's the most exciting words in science. Whereas you don't get that from those who are espousing religion. They don't say more research is needed. We need to devise an experiment to help us to understand this. You don't hear that language from religion. And that's the difference. And that's where I draw the line between this is someone I need to pay more attention to, and this is someone I need to be more skeptical towards.
Right there, because we're talking about evidence and skepticism and how to accept science and all of that sort of thing, I need to make an apology here. And I need to make the apology twice. There were places in our show with Jonathan McLatchie where I should have mentioned his online conversation with Brian Blais, and I didn't. But I think that better than you and I can do it, and believe me, I'm not taking anything away from you. I know how good you are, and it's a privilege to share a mic with you every time we can. But I think even you'll agree that conversation that Jonathan and Brian Blais had is not a conversation that you and I were going to have with Jonathan.
No, because Brian's brain works very differently, and it works the way I've just been describing. Right. And quick shout out to Brian. Thank you, Brian. You've been a supporter of the show for a long time. Link to that conversation in the show notes. Brian's been a guest on the show multiple times. And Brian listened to my conversation on Unbelievable not once but twice, and he listens to it a second time to take notes, to send me a really long email with some really good suggestions and some really good pointers and some really helpful feedback. Thank you, Brian. That is why I adore people like Brian. They've got really good brains. They think scientifically, and you can tell that when you speak to them, because the brain just works differently. You know, it's almost like they've got a neurodivergent disease, because that scientific literacy changes the conception of knowledge. It changes the processing of things. It's constantly asking questions. What about this? What about that? What about the other? Things that us lay people who don't have that seeping of training just aren't on our radar for thinking. And I deeply appreciate the scientifically literate person for that reason.
I hope, listeners, if you don't do anything else from this conversation, if you didn't hear past shows and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to go back and listen or whatnot.
Show notes, check the show notes.
Right. Please, I beg you. We don't take donations on Still Unbelievable, and we never have. And when people say, hey, can I donate to your show? We aim them off to charities. So if you want to do something for this show, read Brian Blais's blog. I'm not kidding. Do something for this show by reading Brian's blog. Read that conversation between Jonathan and Brian. I promise you'll be glad you did. And we will keep finding things like that so you come back to Still Unbelievable. But Brian deserves that support.
He does.
So I'm getting the sense, we sort of talked a little about Justin, we talked a little about Mike. Even though it wasn't in the plan, we talked about the show with Jonathan, and I'm glad we did. Are we at a point where we're headed toward the wind-up?
Yeah, I think so. I'd just like to, by point of excitement, and this year has started really great for us. We've had some really great shows. My favorite show this year, one which we haven't mentioned, but we had so much fun recording it, was our conversation with Becca. At the time of recording this, Becca's episode is 2 weeks away from going live. It will be the next episode of Still Unbelievable. You will have heard it by the time you're listening to this. That's probably, by the time you're listening to this, that will have still been my favorite show of the year. We had such a great time chatting with Becca. I really hope that we get her back on again with her next book, which I understand from her publisher is the tail end of next year. So we're more than a year away from that book. But also this year, the 5th anniversary of the first episode of Still Unbelievable with you and David will be at the tail end of this year. The 100th official episode of Still Unbelievable will be later on this year. So this year has started really well, and it's going to, I'm pretty sure it's going to continue well right towards the tail end of this year. And we have no idea what's going to happen in 2024. So I think this is going to be a really good year for Still Unbelievable.
I do too. I am looking forward to April, especially. There are going to be, listeners, we have a crossover audience with Skeptics and Seekers, and we're going to be doing some more. We're going to be doing some more shows with those cats over there. And in fact, our regular host Matthew Taylor has a regular spot over on Skeptics and Seekers, something that you folks should go listen to. And also, I noticed in some of the comments on the Reason Press website that some people have listened to The Graceful Atheist. You should listen to The Graceful Atheist. Thank you to Graceful David. He puts out a show that you should listen to. So thank you for every chance that we get to interact with The Graceful Atheist.
Yeah, so we need to get him on this year. David, if you're listening to this, get in touch. Let's try and do a show. I know we had an attempt to do one last year and it just didn't work out, and we haven't been back in touch then. That's not through wanting to try. Things have just gone weird for Andrew and I. If you've heard earlier, both our professional and private lives, things are just really busy, and we're doing this solo. But please, let's try and get something done this year. There's multiple shows that we could do with David, and I'd love to record another show with David this year.
And we never made a show happen with the tall, friendly atheist dad.
No, that was another one. Yes, we need to get that one to work as well. It's still on my radar. It's just a case of, I'm so busy and something else has just happened, so that's just going to have to wait. We've been reached out to by a few people this year. That's how some of the shows have happened this year, which have put all my plans for doing other things just been pushed back by months because we've been approached, which is a wonderful place to be in. And I really appreciate being reached out to. I really appreciate it when I get reached out and the email arrives and says, "Dear Matthew, would you like to?" Yes, I would. Definitely I would. And that's what's happened this year, which is quite a bizarre place to be. I'm no longer, I haven't had to beg for a guest, which is great. But at some point I'm going to have to beg again, I'm pretty sure.
And we're not above begging. Right?
No, definitely not. No, I will go on my knees. I really, really will.
So, Matthew, I said it earlier. I mean this. It's a privilege to be able to pick up the mic and do a show with you every time that we get to. Thank you for carrying Still Unbelievable, because it wouldn't be the show that it is without you. In fact, it wouldn't be a show without you, if we're just being honest these days. You do a marvelous job. And
thank you, sir. It's been really good fun. And as I've said previously, this wasn't on my radar to do. I never for a second imagined that I would end up doing this. And it's yours and David's fault, or whoever it was, for whichever one of you said, "Matthew, you should do this because I'm not." And I was like, "Oh, what, really?" And I'm having a whale of a time doing this with you. We're having really good fun. I'm having fabulous conversations. We're having fabulous conversations. The editing is interesting. I've become much more of a whiz at Audacity than I ever expected I would. Yes. And and I keep thinking about the YouTube channel. We have got a YouTube stub for Reason Press. There is zero content there. I keep being told that I need to put content there, and yes, I accept I need to put content there. I just haven't got my head around how I'm going to do it. I am so busy doing our episodes here. It can take me 6 to 8 hours to edit an episode of Still Unbelievable in just audio. I simply don't know how I'm going to go about doing a video channel as well. At some point, I'll try to work it out. And my dog is going mental in the background as well. That's probably a cue. But yeah, there is stuff is going to happen.
So I'm not quite sure how to do it either. I think if we ever manage to put up a video channel, because I'm camera shy, right? I'll be the little cartoon character. You know, they have these YouTube channels now. Bart Ehrman was on one of the shows where the participants were converted to cartoon.
Andrew, so I got to just stop you 1 second. Sorry, Andrew, you may have to start that again.
Yeah, no problem. So if we ever get to video, and I hope that we do, because I'm camera shy, one of the things that I will try to work out is converting my appearance to one of those little cartoon characters, you know, that mouth everything that I say or whatever. Ehrman was on a show like that. And anyway, there's apparently a way to do it. So I'd like to see us move to YouTube at some point, maybe even this year.
I'll see if I can work it out. And I guess really the only thing to say is, and I've never, I can tell you I'm going to stab that dog in the heart one day. I really will.
Take note, Christians. You can get on Matthew's bad side.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't murder my child for God, but I'll murder that dog for peace of mind. Okay, right. Where was I? I was trying to say
something about murdering dogs. I think.
Yeah, I swear, I tell you, I'm gonna.
making YouTube work out.
Yeah, make it work. But one thing I've never asked this before, listeners, but please go on to wherever you get your podcast from. Give us a 49-star review or however it is, and because that's how we get found. That improves our ratings. Apparently, it certainly makes me feel good about myself. Give us that review, please. It will be really nice to see some reviews pop up this year and some lovely comments, etc. And with that said, thank you for listening to Andrew and I whittle along. There was stuff we needed to get off our chest, the stuff we needed to say. I really need to go and kick that dog. But until next time, may the dog live forever. Be reasonable. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.